Hi, everyone. This is the Edpuzzle training for the English Language Proficiency Standards for Adult Education Professional Development. To start off, as our warm-up in the synchronous session, we did a quick brainstorm of any and all educational acronyms or abbreviations that you have learned or that you can think of. Take a minute to type in the pop-up question on Edpuzzle all of the acronyms that come to mind. You may have typed ESL, ESOL, 504, IEP, CCRS, ELP. There are so many abbreviations and they continue changing. So sometimes it can feel a bit like alphabet soup. Today's training has the intention of demystifying the English language proficiency standards and making it a practical, usable document for everyday instruction. Some of the things that we are going to cover are a basic overview. We are also going to go ahead and break apart the English language proficiency standards and think about how these are related to the resources that we have within our program and the strategies that we can use for instruction. At the end of today's professional development Edpuzzle, please don't forget to complete an evaluation. So when it comes to standards, a lot of times when you start teaching, you're sent a link or given a large binder, and then you are instructed to begin using those standards in your day-to-day instruction and lesson planning. So as a new teacher, you might start off using them in one way or just trying to get a handle on how they can be used. But as you progress in your understanding, hopefully you can use them for advanced preparation and to help to differentiate instruction for your students. So take a minute and look at the different stages of using the English language proficiency standards for instruction and think, where do you think you are? So stage one, as a new instructor, you may know what standards you should be using and where to find them, but you haven't really started incorporating them into your lesson plans. Stage two, you can develop your lesson plan and you might be able to copy and paste the appropriate lesson plan into the appropriate standard into the lesson plan, but there's not a ton of intentionality with using the standards. Stage three, you continue doing this, but maybe you start to notice gaps. Maybe certain standards aren't covered quite as often, or certain standards you focus on every day. Stage four, you start to make plans to address those gaps and make sure that your students are getting the essential instruction in skills that may not have been covered. Stage five, you continue to grow in this area and you start to use the standards as a planning tool. And you also start to use the levels within the standard. So if a student is struggling, you may move down a level and make sure that that student has the prerequisite skills or provide them some supports. Or if one student really has it and is ready to move on, you may move up a level and think about how you could extend that skill. Stage six, this is specifically for the English Language Proficiency Standards for Adult Learners document. And that is you start to get an idea of how the English language proficiency standards intersect with the college and career readiness standards for adult learners. And you can use that information to support students with their future goals after they exit their English language learning class. So this might support them with post-secondary education goals or with career training, but it's going to help them become proficient with important college and career readiness skills. Take a minute and briefly reflect on where you are currently. The English Language Proficiency Standards for adult education are the preferred set of standards to use when planning your instruction. They've been developed in accordance with WIOA priorities, and they include correspondences to college and career readiness standards for ELA and literacy, as well as mathematical and science practices. You can access them at this link. I will also post this link in the Edpuzzle. So to start off, we're going to go ahead and do a quick activity to familiarize ourselves with the standards. In the whole group session, this was divided among participants and each person took a section. For the asynchronous Edpuzzle version, we're going to go ahead and break it up and go through each section. As you are going through the sections and skimming, you don't need to read the entire 95-page document. But as you are going through the sections, think about these two questions. First, what is the big idea of these pages? And second, would you use them for instruction? If yes, how so? So for the introduction, the why, and the process, go ahead and skim through those pages and identify what the big idea is and if they would be used for instruction, how so? For this set of pages, the big idea was to address the need for educational equity, access, and rigor for adult English language learners. There was also the goal of ensuring that they were prepared for careers in education and ensuring the incorporation of academic language and access to high quality instruction. This section also described the process for selecting the standards and identified the guiding principles and parameters. Okay. Now let's go ahead and move on. For each prompt that comes up on the screen, you will be asked to look at the specified pages and identify the big idea, as well as if those pages would be used for instruction. A couple of things to note about each of these sections. You can see how the English Language Proficiency Standards View 1 and View 2 have some differences. For beginning to use the standards for instruction, personally, I think that View 1 is a little bit more approachable and easier to get started with. However, for teachers who have been teaching for a little while, it's helpful to also note and make use of View 2. This is particularly helpful for teachers who teach high intermediate or advanced ESOL because your students often have goals of what they'd like to do after really building their proficiency in English. And sometimes that might be transitioning to a job. Other times it might be transitioning to additional training or academic classes. So English language, the View 2 for the ELP standards kind of bridges the gap between the ELP standards themselves and the college and career readiness standards. So I think it's really helpful to begin to make use of those. The correspondence tables identify areas that are also present in the CCRS standards in one big chart. So that can also be a very helpful table, as well as provide real life examples of how these standards could be used and a thought process that a teacher might have. So I think those are really helpful for getting a feel of how those are relevant. One good thing about this document as a whole is that it does sprinkle those real world scenarios throughout. So you can look for the grayed out text box with a scenario in it, and that might be helpful in really internalizing how you could use these standards in instruction. The last thing I'd like to draw everyone's attention to is the appendices. So the appendices are really helpful to different degrees. I specifically want to draw your attention to Appendix C. That will give you supports for each of the levels of the English language proficiency levels. So a lot of those are just generally great strategies to use, but it is a reminder of the type of scaffolds and supports that your students need. So moving on to another activity. This is an example of an English language proficiency standard from View 1. You can see that the white box is the overarching standard. For this one, it says an English language learner can construct meaning from oral presentations and literary and informational text through level appropriate listening, reading, and viewing. Take a minute and I'd like you to try to identify the skills from easiest to most difficult. So the order that they are in right now is not the correct order. They are mixed up. So take a minute to write out the colors from easy to most complex. The correct answer for this will be identified in a note, but it should be easiest is purple, then green, then blue, then red, then yellow. So as you see those skills start from easiest to most complex, what differences do you notice between the levels? Some of the differences that I note are that they start off with a very limited set of strategies, and as they learn more and increase in their understanding, they have additional strategies to use. And in the beginning, they might only have to identify a few key phrases or words, but towards the end, they're asked to identify both central ideas and supporting details, as well as using analysis and evidence from these texts. They're also asked to summarize or put it into their own words, which can be a very complex skill. This chart is in the front of all of the future textbooks. Take a minute to think about your class and the textbook that you use for teaching and get an idea of what level your students are at for both the English language proficiency standards, the college and career readiness standards, and also where their CASAS scores should fall. The CASAS scores guide us in placing students into the correct class, but the English language proficiency standards and the college and career readiness standards should help you to identify appropriate lesson content and appropriate materials to use in class. This chart is from the English language proficiency standards, Appendix C. It gives you an idea of what supports are going to be helpful. So for English language proficiency levels 1 and 2, and just refreshing ourselves, that's going to be future intro all the way up through future level 2. You can see that students need a wide range of support in both teacher language and communication, materials and activities, and student groupings. So this is a good handout to have printed out or on hand, just as a reminder of the types of strategies that teachers are going to want to use in class. This screen right here also provides the Lexile levels for students. So a lot of times when you're using the future textbook, those texts have already been identified and are shown to be at an appropriate level for your students. However, if you are selecting a text from an external resource like Newsella, ReadWorks, readingskillsfortoday.com, you're going to want to make sure the text is at the appropriate Lexile level. And for example, just taking this college and career readiness skills band B. Okay, so if you have level B, that's going to be at future level 3. Okay, so for those students, you're going to want to look for text that's in between 420 and 820 Lexile level. Think about the level that you instruct. What prerequisite skills do students need to achieve the objective? And do you think that your students are there? These are helpful questions to ask as you are lesson planning. Before we wrap up the training, take a minute to reflect. How do you plan to use these standards for planning purposes? How do you think they can enhance your instruction? And if you have any questions, you can hold on to them and you can enter them in the evaluation, which will come up in a couple of slides. Lastly, let's revisit that question from the beginning. In the beginning, you were asked to reflect and think about where you currently are in using the standards. Think about what your goal might be. Maybe not for this session, but maybe in the future. Where is the next step in using standards for instruction? Thank you for watching this Edpuzzle Professional Development. I am looking forward to reading responses and seeing how you might incorporate these types of activities and resources into instruction and lesson planning. Please take a minute to complete the evaluation. Thanks again, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.